Hello, good day to you. And today I'm here to talk about Merry Wives of Windsor, one of Shakespeare's comedies, and to ask the question, who burns Falstaff? Here's a picture from the last scene of the play. We can see Falstaff wearing some horns, and he's been asked to come to the forest here at night by the two wives standing either side of him, Mistress Ford and Mistress Page. In the background there, you can just make out two characters coming with tapers. They're going to disturb Falstaff in this meeting and then capture him and put him to a taper trial. They're going to burn his fingers with the tapers or torches that you can see carrying. But the question I'm going to try and answer is, who burns Falstaff? Who are those people with the torches? So who am I to talk about this? My name is Brett Jones, and I have recently had a paper published in Notes and Queries that was in December 2024, and it discussed the meanings behind the names of the fairies in the Merry Wives of Windsor, along with the torchbearers that I just showed you. Also, a gang of children dressed up as fairies also captured Falstaff, and some of these fairies had names and were given instructions. I was able to show in this paper that the names and the instructions are quite significant and important, and in uncovering that, I was able to unravel the relationship between the quarto and the folio versions of this play. Two very different versions. I was able to untangle what the relationship between them is. So, first of all, how is this video going to progress? Well, in talking about the troubles with the taper trial, I'm going to start with identifying what the problems in this scene are. Then I'm going to tell you about my solution. And this is going to lead into my discussion about the things from the essay, which would include the significance of the disguises being worn, and the meanings behind the fairy names and the instructions that they give, the instructions that the fairies are given. And finally, tell you what my solution tells us about the two texts, the quarto and the folio version, and show you how they were related. So let's start by looking at the taper trial and that final scene and seeing what the problems in the two texts are. So, in the final scene of the Merry Wives of Windsor, Mistress Ford and Mistress Page have tricked Falstaff into coming to visit them in the woods at night. He's hoping for a romantic tryst, but instead, the wives have prepared a different kind of surprise for him. And in alignment with this preparation, suddenly a crowd rushes in, dressed up as supernatural beings. They catch Falstaff and they force him into this trial by fire, this taper trial. Now, as I've said, we have two texts of this play. One was printed on its own in 1602. This was a smaller text called a quarto, and so it's referred to as Q. And there was an official version of the play printed by Shakespeare's company together with all of his other plays in 1623. Big kind of hardback book. This was a folio, so this is referred to as F. Q and F have some differences, in particular where the taper trial is concerned, and these hint at some important differences between where the two texts come from. So in discussing all of this and the meanings behind the names and the disguises, I'm going to tease out what hasn't been known before, the exact relationship between Q and F of Merry Wives of Windsor. So here's how the taper trial starts in the quarto. And here it is in the folio. So if we start with the stage directions, which you can see here and here, Q has far more extensive stage directions than F, as you can see. So Q tells us that when Falstaff and the two wives are disturbed by this loud noise, the two women run away and boys enter dressed like fairies. At the same point in the folio, we just get enter fairies, but this seems to align with what we have in Q. Next up, the quarto. Q tells us that Mistress Quickly is there too. and she's dressed like the Queen of Fairies. Now, the folio doesn't explicitly tell us what Quickly is dressed as, but we can see that in both versions of the text, she is the first person to talk and she's giving instructions. So it seems like the folio is also following Q here too. At the end of her instructions in Q, Mistress Quickly says, "Give them their charge pack before they part away." So she's talking to another adult character, telling them, give the fairies, the children, their instructions. And in the folio, her lines seem to mean pretty much the same thing, but it's not the same line. She says, "Crier hobgoblin, make the fairy oye." She's talking to an adult person who's also dressed up as a supernatural being with her, telling that person to give the fairy children around them their instructions. But this time she's calling them the fairy goblin and saying, "Make the fairy oye." Whereas in the quarto, she had said, "Pack, give them their instructions, give them their charge pack." In the folio, instead, it's hobgoblin and make the fairy oye. Well, who is Pack? Pack is another name for Robin Goodfellow, as we see in Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, where both names are used. And in this, on this front cover here from 1639, but also it was, this is a reprint from 1629, you can see Robin Goodfellow or Pack with cloven hooves on his hind quarters. Now, this image of Pack fits with the quarto because we can see another person who has entered with Mistress Quickly and the boys dressed like fairies is Sir Hu, dressed like a satyre. The satyrs from Greek mythology had goatish hind quarters, just like Pack does here in this on this cover. So, in the quarto version, we seem to have Master Parson Sir Hu Evans dressed something in this fashion with goatish or horseish hind quarters. But in the folio instead, it's hobgoblin and make the fairy oye. And later on in the folio, there's more evidence that Sir Hu is dressed as a fairy. Falstaff says, "Heavens defend me from that Welsh Fairy." Master Parson Sir Hu Evans is Welsh, so it seems again we have evidence that he is dressed as a fairy in the folio, but a satyre or something goatish or horseish in the quarto version. So we have children dressed as fairies and Mistress Quickly in charge of the operation in both texts. In Q, she is dressed as Queen of the Fairies. In F, her garb isn't described, but she's fulfilling the same role. Q has the Welsh Master Parson Sir Hu Evans here, being dressed as a satyre or Pack, which means cloven hooved hindquarters. By contrast, in F, it has the same character here, but he's dressed as a fairy instead. Next, just as Mistress Quickly has instructed, the disguised adult is going to give the boy fairies their instructions. In both versions, 2 sets of instructions are given. So they're given to 2 different boy fairies who are named, but they are very different sets of instructions. So here's the first set of instructions from Q, and the same first set of instructions from F. Immediately, we can see different speakers. Sir Hu, we know he's there in the quarto, it was mentioned in the stage direction. Sir Hu is speaking the first set of instructions in the quarto, but in F, it's Pistol who's appeared seemingly from nowhere. And many editions will point out that there's difficulties with Pistol. Is he here or not in the folio? It's very elusive. My theory is going to explain his elusive appearance. So we have 2 different speakers, and Sir Hu picks up a fairy, give him his instructions, or talks to him at least. In my head, he's picking up the fairy boy. Come hither, Peen. So he names the boy fairy as Peen, whereas in the folio, this boy fairy is named Cricket. And what are the instructions? Well, in Q, Sir Hu says, with your long nails, pinch her. So he's got to find a lazy servant, and he says, Peen, with your long nails, pinch her. Whereas in F, Pistol, it seems, has said to Cricket that you must go and leap to Windsor chimneys. Different names and different instructions and different speakers. So we have different speakers, different fairy names, and different instructions here. What about the second set of instructions? Here we have the second set of instructions from Q, and here they are from F. This time we can see the same speaker, Welsh Master Parson Sir Hu Evans, called Hugh in Q, called Hugh in Q and called Evans in the F, but is the same person. And he is instructing a fairy who he is choosing to name Peed in Q and Bede in F. In fact, this is the same name again, but Q is reflecting Sir Hugh's Welsh accent. We see it elsewhere in the text where Sir Hu Evans will sometimes have a P instead of a B. And in Q, he is instructing the fairy to seek out brokers and sergeants and proctors. But this is different now. In the folio, he's instructing Bede to seek out maids. And what should he do to them? Well, in Q, those brokers, sergeants, and proctors, Sir Hu says, pinch the lousy sergeant's face. Whereas in F, there's still pinching involved. For the maid, pinch them arms, legs, backs, shoulders, sides, and shins. However, there's more to these instructions. This fairy, Bede, must punish discerningly, because there's a key word in both of these. But. So, if you find a wrongdoer, you must do this thing. You must pinch them. But if you find different people doing different actions, you should do something else. And so, in Q, the but is concerning, but spare such whose nose looks blue and red. Now this would be a reference to Bardolph, the only character in the play whose nose is blue and red. But Sir Hu has basically nothing to do with Bardolph in the play, so why he's suddenly concerned with sparing him is a mystery. It's a mystery that I can solve as I present my solution. What about in the folio? Bede is supposed to pinch maids, and if we read this piece in entirety, we'll see that his actions that Evans is instructing Bede to follow, it's to punish maids that have not said their prayers. However, maids who have said their prayers will get a nice night's sleep. He says, if you find a maid that before she sleeps has 3 times said her prayers, then raise up the organs of her fantasy, give her nice dreams, and she can sleep as sound as a careless infant. But those that sleep and think not on their sins, that haven't said their prayers, pinch them. So in both sets of instructions, we get discerning punishment. If so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so, pinch them. If not, spare them or give them nice dreams. However, who is being punished and who is being spared is different. And at least in F, we can see Master Parson Sir Hu Evans is concerned with maids saying their prayers, fitting for a Master Parson. Sir Hu worrying about sparing Bardolph, as he does in Q, is not so easily explicable, unless you have my theory, which we don't have yet. So in Q, Sir Hu is dressed as a satyre, but in F, Sir Hu is dressed as a Welsh fairy. In Q, he is the only one giving instructions. Both sets of instructions come from him, his speech prefix. In F, he seems to be there with Pistol. Additions question this because there are just 3 bits from Pistol, and it's unclear to exactly what he's doing here. I will explain it as we go through. In Q, Sir Hu tells Peen to pinch with his long fingernails. In F, Pistol tells Cricket to leap to Windsor chimneys. First sets of instructions. And the second set of instructions in Q, Sir Hu tells Peed to hunt for brokers, proctors, and sergeants, and to pinch the sergeants. But he says to spare anyone whose nose is red and blue. i.e. spare Bardolph for some reason. But in F, Sir Hu tells Bede to pinch maids who have not said their prayers, and he says to give good dreams to any maid who has said her prayers. Next, we come to the taper trial itself. These supernatural beings run around the stage, they capture Falstaff, and they prepare to burn his fingers. But things get a little more confusing. Here it is in Q, and here is the taper trial in F. And remember, we seem to have perhaps two people in F, Sir Hugh Evans and Pistol. Pistol crops up again. Here's his second of 3 speech prefixes. What's he doing here? Is he really here? It's confusing until I give you my theory. And in Q, it seems that there is one person, just Sir Hugh. It's been clear up till now, Q only has Sir Hugh giving instructions to the fairies. Now we muddy the water, because in Q, Mistress Quickly first says, take a torch, take a taper in your hand. Singular, we have a single taper. And she's telling somebody, here, take the torch in your hand. However, when Sir Hugh gets a chance to speak, he says, give me the tapers. So who has Quickly given a taper to? She says, take a taper in your hand. But Sir Hugh doesn't have one because he has to ask, give me the tapers. And you might also notice that a taper has become tapers. The plural becomes more explicit in the stage directions then. They put the tapers to his fingers and he starts. He is Falstaff. But who are they? If it's Sir Hugh, why do we suddenly have they put the tapers to his fingers? We suddenly seem to have 2 or more people burning Falstaff. We had the intimation of 2 people being there in F, but suddenly it seems like it might be 2 people in Q. And there's another hint of something going on here. If you look at the speech prefixes, we see Sir Hugh is talking, give me the tapers. Then we get the stage direction. Then we get Sir Hugh talking some more. And this Sir Hugh continuing to talk has another speech prefix for it. Now, when a character is talking, and then there's a stage direction, and then the same character continues talking, this happens 9 or 10 times in Q, and never, ever in Q does the same character need a second speech prefix to show that they continue talking after the stage direction. In every other instance of this happening in Q, there would be no speech prefix here. It just continues with the dialogue because you would know it was Sir Hugh still talking. But here, Sir Hugh gets a second speech prefix. I think something has gone on here. I'll speak about that in more detail as we get to it. First of all, I want to sum up what the problems are. So, I want to be able to tell you how many people are burning Falstaff. I want to be able to tell you what Sir Hugh is disguised as. I want to tell you which sets of instructions and which fairies' names are the correct ones, and explain to you why Sir Hugh seems to want to protect Bardolph, a character he barely knows. Luckily, I have one solution that can answer all of these questions and account for all of the textual oddities that I have shown you. So, what is my solution? My solution lies in the relationship between Q and F. For a long time, people supposed that F from the official folio was the real play, and that Q was some kind of unofficial copy, a pirated text, so that any differences were copying errors made in Q. It was even called a bad quarto. Recently, critics have begun to turn to a different theory, that Q and F reflect 2 distinct but generally equally valid versions of the play. My solution is a combination of these 2 ideas, but it contains a twist that suddenly reveals exactly what's going on in the 2 texts. My theory is Q and F do reflect two different and distinct versions of the play, but Q is still a pirated document. Q is the text from that earlier version of the play, but it has been doctored to make it look more like the newer F version of Merry Wives. So Q contains the original dialogue from the earlier version, but somebody has been making superficial changes to make it look like it's the version that's in F. So originally, two people had conducted the taper trial on Falstaff. They were Pistol and his companion, who in the plays is called Nym. I have an additional theory that originally he had a different name, but I'm not going to go into that in this video. Just to say, originally it was Pistol and his friend who were originally torturing Falstaff, and they had been dressed as Satyre here. They gave instructions to peen and to bead. So you can see that I'm saying the original, you can see in the quote of the Satyre disguises and the instructions to peen and to bead. Q has the dialogue from the original version. And this explains why there was the caution to spare anyone with a blue and red nose. This was a reference to their acquaintance, Bardolph. This dialogue comes from the original version. The person who was doctoring this play knew, hang on, the revised version just has Sir Hu here. So he changed the speech prefixes to Sir Hu says this, Sir Hu says this, but he didn't change the dialogue itself. So we get Pistol and his companions' speeches thrust into the mouth of Sir Hu in Q. And then these two had together burnt Falstaff in the original version. Shakespeare then wrote a new version of this play. This is what we see in F. In this new version, he replaced Pistol and his friend with just Sir Hu. And Sir Hu was now disguised as a fairy. Sir Hu gave instructions to Cricket and to Bede, different instructions to Bede, this time regarding a maid, whether or not she's said her prayers. Makes sense because Sir Hu would be interested in that, being as he is a master parson. The caution to spare maids who have said their prayers was because Sir Hu is a master parson. So we see two sets of dialogue in the two versions, spoken by different people, but Q's dialogue has been thrust into the mouth of Sir Hu by having the speech prefix changed because the person doctoring Q was aware that in the new version it was Sir Hu here, not Pistol and his friend. And in F, in the new version, it was now Sir Hu who was burning Falstaff. After Shakespeare had written this new version of the play, somebody took a copy of the original version of the play and tried to make it look like the new version. That is what was printed in 1602 as Q. The original version doctored to appear more like F. So here is what happened. I want to visually try and show it to you. So this is what I think the original version of the taper trial looked like and how it was changed to look more like Shakespeare's new version. So originally, we'd had the stage direction. I've taken this from Q, but I've made it look like it was the original. So Pistol and Nym, but it had a different name then, dressed like Satyre, and boys dressed like fairies, Mistress Quickly like the Queen of Fairies. That is what the original version had looked like. Shakespeare had written F, it had been performed on stage. Now somebody took this old text and decided to make it look like F. He knew it's not Pistol and Nym here anymore. So he took that away and he said, enter Sir Hu. Didn't change the whole thing, just the names. So it's now enter Sir Hu like a Satyre, which makes no sense for Hu to be a Satyre. Then, when it comes to the first set of instructions, it had been Pistol giving them. He had talked to Peen, talked about go and pinch people with your long nails. The person behind the production of Q knew it's not Pistol anymore, it is Sir Hu. So he changed the speech prefix, but preserved for us the original dialogue. Conversely, for the folio, Shakespeare had rewritten these lines of dialogue extensively so that Sir Hu had new dialogue fitting to Sir Hu, but for whatever reason, the speech prefix wasn't clearly changed to Sir Hu. So when they put together the text for the folio in 1623, after Shakespeare died, the person presenting, making up the folio text, possibly Ralph Brain, when he was compositing this, he couldn't really make it out. He saw the original name there on the paper, Pistol, and he saw the new lines of dialogue. So he accidentally said Pistol, these lines of dialogue. So Pistol's presence in the folio is a vestigial remainder of that character who had actually been there in the original. And also, I can give you the second set of instructions as they had looked originally. Q is preserving most of it for us, except that originally this had been spoken, the second set of instructions had been spoken by Nym, different name but Falstaff's companion, and he had talked to Bede, B-E-D-E, the person trying to make the old text look like the folio newer version, knew that these Pistol and his friend are not here anymore, so I need to change this to Sir Hu who's talking. And he went a little further. He also changed the pronunciation. Sir Hu was Welsh, so he would have said peed. And I think he must have done the same here with nose looks blue and red. He changed to plew and red. He didn't change them all, so he overlooked the B in brokers here. I think that's another little clue that it had been a different speaker originally. And so now we see the original version of the old play. And now we see the person behind Q's attempt to doctor the old version to look like F. He's put Sir Hu here and his Welsh pronunciation. But he's preserved for us the original dialogue. Now I can show you why Sir Hu seems to be saying, "Spare those whose noses look red and blue." Doesn't care about Bardolph. Why would he? He's only met him briefly in the very first scene. They barely exchanged any interaction. No, this was Bardolph's good friend, Pistol, and his acquaintance, and they would of course say, "Spare our friend Bardolph, spare those with blue and red noses." Now we come to the taper trial itself. Here is how I think it looked in the original version. Now, in the taper trial, in Q, it revolves around the first letter of Falstaff's name. But we know that Falstaff went by another name, Oldcastle. We see some evidence for this in the quarto for Henry IV, Part 1, and also in Henry IV, Part 2, Shakespeare has to go as far as to deny any connection between Falstaff and Oldcastle. But here, it makes more sense if quickly says, if his name begins with an O, because now I'm going to show how this is relevant in a few seconds. But if she says, as we see in the folio, as we see in Q, if with an F it does begin, there is no further relevance. So I think originally she said, if his name begins with an O, we can be sure he's full of sin. About it then, okay, let's burn him. And then Pistol or his friend had said, "Give me the tapers and I will try." Remember, Quickly had said, "Take a taper in your hand." She'd given a taper to one person. There had been two here. That's why we suddenly get this confusion. There seems to be two people here. There had been two people here. The quarto is trying to make it look like there's only one person, Sir Hu, because that's how it happens in F. But originally, the text that they are using had two people. Quickly had given the torch to one person. Now the other person, Pistol or his friend, says, "No, give me the torch. I will test him if he loves venery." This makes sense of the stage direction. The two of them, they put the tapers to his fingers. Pistol and his friend had burnt Oldcastle's fingers, and he starts. What did he start? Well, in the folio, in F, Falstaff gets a couple of exclamations, "Oh, oh, oh," at this point to show he's being burnt. I think that this had been here in the quarto, and "oh, oh, oh" was a revelation of the first letter of his name. So quickly it said, if with an O his name begins, then Pistol and his friend, they had put the torch to Oldcastle's fingers, and he had yelled out, "Oh, oh, oh," beginning of his name. Oldcastle, oh, oh, oh. It had revealed the first letter of his name. Now it makes sense to have the quickly say, if with an O his name begins, because we got the O, O, O as a revelation. Then after that, Pistol on Nym had said, "It is right indeed. He is full of lecheries and iniquity." So now I've explained why quickly says if with an F it does begin, when in Q it apparently has no relevance to it, and also why we have this confusion here of is it one speaker or two, one taper or two. This is what the original version of this play had looked like. Shakespeare wrote a new version in F. Somebody saw F performed and tried to make the text of the original version look more like F. So what did he do? Well, the dialogue that had been Pistol or his friends was given to Sir Hu, and also if with an O it doth begin was changed to if with an F, and Falstaff or Oldcastle exclaiming "oh, oh, oh" was removed, and then we get exactly what we see in Q. I can explain to you now why that happened, why we have it with its confusions. You can see exactly why that happened, where that's come from. Following on from this, you can also see now the reason why Pistol seems to be in the folio version. It's because his name has been accidentally left in for 3 speech prefixes. The editor of this play in the folio, perhaps Ralph Crane, he's got confused. He's seen Pistol because that was originally who was speaking, and he's left in 3 times when Pistol is speaking, but given him some of the new dialogue, as I showed you. These speech prefixes in F are a fossil or a vestigial remainder from the earlier version of the play. And as I said before, many editions have pointed out how problematic it is to have Pistol appear here in the folio. In the Norton text, they have a footnote here, and they say, "Hobgoblin may have been played by Pistol, or simply by the actor who played Pistol doubling up." But that doesn't really explain why he'd be called Pistol in the speech prefix then. It's because Pistol was here in the original. In the Oxford version, for this part, with the crier Hobgoblin, they say the 1623 edition has Pistol play the Hobgoblin. If they're not exactly certain, so they say if Pistol's identity is at any point made clear to the audience, his desire for revenge on Falstaff is visibly achieved. And in the Arden edition, Giorgio Melchiori says, "There's something not quite right with Pistol here, not quite sure what's going on. Possibly his reintroduction here was an authorial second thought. In fact, quite the opposite. It was a first thought, but he was removed from the second version, but not quite entirely successfully removed for F text." So now, I can talk about the disguises, fairy names, and the instructions. This is exactly what I talked about in my essay in Notes and Queries. And so I'm going to explain the significance of the different disguises, Satyre or the fairies, the different fairy names, and the different instructions. So in the original version, Pistol and Nym were dressed as Satyre or Pack. They were telling Peen to pinch with long nails, telling Bede to punish discerningly, pinch sergeants, and spare Bardolph. In the new version, Sir Hu was dressed as a fairy, telling Cricket to leap, and telling Bede to punish maids discerningly, based on whether they had said their prayers or not. So first, what's the significance of the disguises? Satyre, as we saw in Q, was linked to satire, by Elizabethans. So those Greek mythological creatures with the cloven hooved hindquarters, Satyre with a Y, they were linked to the literary form of mocking people in power, satire with an I. Elizabethans conflated the two. And I can show you this. This is Satyre 9 from John Marston's Pygmalion, which was printed in 1598. And he's writing satires, mocking powerful people, but conflating the satires with the Greek mythological creatures, satyres. We can see, "Quake to behold a sharp-funged satirist. Oh, how on tiptoes proudly mounts my muse, stalking a loftier gait than satires used." So stalking, like a stalking horse, proudly mounting on tiptoes. You get some image of a horse, and also the rough-tongued satires part. Again, maybe the rough tongue of a horse. So some suggestion of the Greek mythological creature. But I can go better than that. This is from Joseph Hawes, 1598, Legidimarium, and this is in his preface to Book 4. And he's talking to his satires, the charge to his satires. He's writing satires too. Again, we see a conflation between the art form of satire and the Greek mythological creatures. And he says, "They are stamping like Bucephal, whose slackened reins and bloody fetlocks fry with 7 men's brains." Reins and fetlocks, definitely with horses, and also Bucephal is Alexander the Great's horse, Bucephalus. So clearly he's thinking of cloven hooved hindquarters for his satires, just as in Q somebody was dressed as a satyre. And I'm saying it was Pistol and his friend, not Sir Hu. So in version 1, Oldcastle was tormented by satyres, which were linked to satire, the art form. But in F, in version 2, Sir Hu was dressed as a fairy. Fairies were linked to Catholicism of the old faith. In my essay, I quote quite a variety of sources that have come up with this theory connecting fairies in the Elizabethan mindset to the old faith of Catholicism. You can see my list of critics citing these with this idea. Originally then, 2 of Oldcastle's friends had burnt him whilst they were dressed as Satyre, just as though court satirists were tricking Lord Cobham. Lord Cobham was the official title of Sir John Oldcastle. In the revised version, a fairy like Master Parson, representing Catholicism, had burnt him. The historical Oldcastle had been burnt for being a lollard. So maybe there's a link there to Sir Hu, the religious figure, burning Oldcastle. Oldcastle had been a lollard. What about links with the fairy names and their instructions? Well, the clearest link is cricket and to leap. This comes from F, and the first set of instructions, Sir Hu says, "Cricket, you must leap to Windsor chimneys." Obvious connection. Crickets are those leaping insects. Peen, and Peen is told to go and pinch with long nails. This is the first set of instructions in Q. So this would be Pistol. I'm saying it was Pistol telling the first fairy, giving them the name Peen, to go and pinch with long nails. And it was my privilege in Notes and Queries to be the first, I believe, to point out Peen was an old name for the god Apollo. If we look at Arthur Golding's 1567 translation of Ovid's Metamorphosis, then in this book, Apollo chases Daphne and she transforms into a laurel tree to escape from him. Apollo speaks at this point, and when he's finished, Arthur Golding writes, "When that Peen of this talk had fully made an end." So he calls Apollo Peen. And also in Marlowe and Nash's play Dido, Queen of Carthage, which you can see here, printed in 1594, Dido calls Aeneas the man whose amorous face like peen sparkles fire. Another reference, or another instance of Apollo being called Peen. Like Peen, Aeneas's face sparkles like fire. Peen is Apollo, god of the sun, sparkling like fire. So Peen is associated with the sun. And if you remember in Q's dialogue, Peen had to pinch with long fingernails the lazy servants. Long fingernails are the growing shadows of the day caused by the sun. So Peen the fairy, associated with the sun, is going to punish lazy servants coming to the end of the day, lengthening shadows, and the lazy servants haven't finished their jobs, so they're panicking. That is Peen punishing them. Which brings me to Bede, with the same name in Q and F, but different punishment. Remember, with Bede, they had to punish discerningly, and that's the key. In my essay in Notes and Queries, again, I believe I was the first to point out that Bede, that name comes from a common name for the white thistle. And you can find this in John Florio's World of Words, printed in 1598, where he says Bede is another name for the white thistle. What's significant about that is what Robert Corddry says about thistles in A Treasury or Storehouse of Similes, printed in 1600. How can you use a thistle as a simile? Well, he says they have a quality. If thistles are stroked upwards, they will not lightly molest the man. They won't do anything with you. But if they are stroked downwards, they do prick him. Different actions will give you painless or painful effects or reactions. So if you stroke the thistle upwards, you're fine. If you stroke it downwards, you will be pricked. Or, as Shakespeare says, pinched. In Q and F, remember, Bede had to spare some people or pinch others. If they were doing one thing, stroking upwards, they're fine, they're left unmolested. If, on the other hand, they're doing the other thing, prick or pinch them. This fairy was called Bede because it was a joke, a simile or a metaphor for the thistle. Bede is going to punish you if you do this and spare you if you do that. Just as Peen was associated with the sun, and so the long fingernails, that was appropriate for Peen to be doing. Bede's instructions were appropriate to Bede because of Bede's name. This is why Bede is asked to punish discerningly. Just like the thistle, he can cause pain or leave you alone. It's based on the behaviour you exhibit. The uncovering of this meaning reveals something about Ben Jonson's 1599 play, Every Man Out of His Humour. Sogliardo, in that play, he's a character who has long been seen as a satirical swipe at Shakespeare. Due to Sogliardo's coat of arms, the motto there resembles Shakespeare's family coat of arms' motto. Understanding that Bede meant thistle adds to our understanding of Sogliardo's coat of arms and Ben Jonson's mockery of Shakespeare. But I can't go into that here. I have another video explaining that, which you can find here. So after that teaser, moving on. What does my solution tell us about the texts then? My solution tells us that Q and F are two distinct versions of this play. Very different versions. It tells us that Q reflects the earlier version, wherein Pistol and his friend burned Falstaff, although Falstaff was then called Oldcastle, and Pistol and his friend had been dressed as satyres. In F, the newer version of this play, it had been Sir Hu who had burnt Falstaff, while Sir Hu was dressed as a fairy. So Shakespeare had completely rewritten this taper trial section, different characters and different disguises, giving the fairies different instructions. And he had very carefully thought about these changes, so he'd written different instructions from Sir Hu. No longer was he concerned about anybody whose nose was blue and red. Instead, he was asking Bede to discerningly punish maids who hadn't said their prayers. Q has superficially been changed to make it look like F, so we see Sir Hu's name in the speech prefixes, but the dialogue preserves the older version. So we get to see another version of Shakespeare's play, and we get to see somebody else, not Sir Hu, who'd been concerned with sparing somebody whose nose is blue and red. Hu is made from that earlier version, and so preserves so much of the dialogue. We get that original still, but it's been superficially doctored to look like F. There we go. I have been able to untangle the long ravelled relationship between Q and F of Merry Wives of Windsor, and in doing so been able to make sense or explain for you many of the differences and discrepancies in this final scene of Merry Wives of Windsor in those two texts. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you have a pleasant day. Goodbye.